Here are some of the lyrics. You ready? Whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. Hold up. I said certified freak 7 days a week. Wet ass P-word.
I'm kind of kicking myself for doing this video because I don't like giving these guys a nod. I don't like helping to platform them in any way. The only reason I did is because I'm sure everybody has heard of Ben Shapiro and how he destroys people. But please.
Thanks to his enormous ambition and self-discipline, Ben was able to start working as a professional political commentator when he was just a teenager. This was a big deal because society does not generally think of teenagers as having particularly worthwhile political opinions, just because people at that age do not tend to have a lot of depth of knowledge about the world. But Ben was able to make up for this by ratcheting up his other two stats, confidence and consistency. He was able to overcome his handicap and stand out in a crowded marketplace by carrying himself in this extremely assertive way and being very consistently right-wing.
Well, I suppose that's true.
If you're a fan of Shapiro and agree with everything or most or even some of what he says, then why not watch this video to test your own convictions? If Ben is speaking the truth, then surely what I say isn't going to change your mind.
And I have 5 million Facebook followers. My wife's a doctor, and I feel like that's more empowering than like... Dude, I have like millions of people who are members of my audience. That's due to American racism. No, you stupid. Any societal structure that results...
This is going to be the challenge of the video you are currently watching, which is no doubt like 3 hours long. Ben says a lot of things, and he says them very fast. And if you were to look them up, they will be, on a surface level, possibly, maybe even probably, correct.
I mean, because the one thing that's not taken into account is the actual lockdown measures, right? So what we're watching, for example, right now in Sweden is Sweden's rate continues to go up. Will it surpass Switzerland? Probably not. Will it surpass Italy? Probably not. Also, when you adjust for population, it kind of gives you some weird outliers because some places have only 6 million people or 5 million people. Right. The United States has 330 million people, so your sample size.
Well, you can't count like Andorra, for example. Like I don't use those.
Right, exactly.
Or
like
Luxembourg.
Micronesia. Right. I mean, there are certain places where one person dies and your actual death per million rate is like 50 because there's only 10 people in the country, right? Right. So that kind of makes it difficult.
Things that perfectly illustrate why Ben Shapiro isn't a serious person, despite being a very serious person, and thus should not be taken seriously. That's the point of this video. Also this, which we'll get to.
Whoa, whoa.
Certified freaks, 7 days a week. Wet ass P-word. Make that pull-out game weak. Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
okay, I got an idea.
I suppose that's true.
What did Ben Shapiro say that triggered you to say, hey, maybe I should look into Trump?
I can't remember the context exactly of that particular speech, but I do remember the feeling I had. There were some really crazy protests outside of the venue he was speaking at on campus, and I just didn't get it. So I wanted to hear for myself, okay, like what's going on with this guy? Why do people hate him so much?
Being a professional pundit is a very flattering, very empowering existence. Being paid to share your opinions with the world can make you feel like a real big shot, because it means that someone out there has made an assessment that your opinions are inherently valuable. Now, Ben Shapiro is an adult, and I'm sure he will do fine, but I do worry a bit about the degree that he has become a bad role model. You see a lot of people getting into professional political commentary at younger and younger ages these days. Not only people in their early 20s, but teenagers and even kids. And these kiddos are trying to make a name for themselves in a political commentary marketplace that is not only getting more and more competitive, but is also descending into a kind of shock jock culture where you have to be extremely wild and outrageous to even get noticed.
So that's what I hope people really see, is they see the guy that is known for destroying somebody he is handpicked to destroy. And then the second he encounters any resistance, oh, well, this person's a leftist and I don't have to listen to him.
In a helpful way. As is so often the case in life, there are always trade-offs that have to be made in the delicate balance between commercial success, fame, self-respect, and personal ethics.
I wanted to get like a phrase or something he said that incites violence, because that's a critical claim of somebody, right?
Do you want me to pull up Wikipedia?
I know.
So to his credit, Ben claims to regularly update an article devoted to all the times in which he was wrong.
I have an entire list on my website, sir. On my list, I have an entire website of dumb, bad things that I've said.
But here's the thing. For starters, the list isn't nearly long enough, and half of them are actually just like doubling down or trying to defend his terrible opinions and arguments. The other half, where he admits he was wrong, is horrifying. Why? Because the things he's renouncing are not only extreme, but displayed with zero honest self-reflection in his remarks. One of the articles he's renounced, written in 2002, was in support of ignoring civilian casualties in foreign countries. Ben very rightfully calls the piece something he wished he never wrote, but then chops it up to being 19 and dumb. You know, like how we all used to support war crimes as young adults. A year after that, he wrote another article calling for the transfer of Palestinian Arabs from Judea and Samaria and Israel. Ethnic cleansing, one could probably call it. This is something Ben now points out as being inhumane and impractical. But again, who hasn't called for expelling an entire race of people in their late teens, huh?
Ben, I don't know if you know this, but your favorite Zionist ethnostate is very fond of murdering journalists. You'll see this a lot from our baby boy. He'll denounce something to the ends of the earth, but that same ethnostate he loves is very fond of doing those very same things, yet not a single condemnation from his side. This isn't whataboutism. The fault in his argument is again missing the political dimensions and nuance. Mexico, an intensely Catholic country, is the most dangerous place for journalists in the world. Does that mean Christians are incompatible with the modern concept of journalism? No, of course not. The handful of attacks on journalists carried out by Muslims have been the exception, an absolute minority, not the rule. The only reason it may appear otherwise is, again, because of increased media attention to Muslim perpetrators. Looking at the research compiled by the UN, controlling for other factors, an attack perpetrated by Muslims is covered significantly more than other terrorist attacks, and much attention is given to attacks in Western countries, despite 96% of the victims of terrorism in 2016 being in Africa, the Middle East, or South Asia, and usually being Muslims themselves. This is how and why Ben can get away with spewing nonsense like this and be believed. People exposed to mostly Western media probably just don't know better.
These two articles should be serious moments of reflection for someone actually considering their own bias and xenophobia. But Ben gives it a few paragraphs of, right, I was wrong, you got me. His main explanation for the majority of his retractions is the fact that he's written a lot and tweeted a lot. So statistically, he's bound to say some really dumb things. But what he's retracting is extremely dark shit. And again, he doesn't seem to have grown as a person. Because as the timeline of his retractions continue, they are almost always based around comments that were seen as racist, often toward Muslims or immigrants, but not exclusively. It's the same problem over and over, spanning years. Also, one of the things he retracted was this article where he defended Representative Steve King's racist comments, later updated when King put out even more direct support of white supremacy. Ben later even urged Congress to censure him. But the damage was done. He was reelected in 2018. Between that original defense from Shapiro and the later correction. So you have to wonder, does Ben feel the least bit bad about his albeit small support for him and unnecessary defense of him? And will he learn from this experience to perhaps listen to people when they identify other examples of racist dog whistling from politicians or people like George Zimmerman, a definite racist? Like, generally, maybe he shouldn't write so many words justifying racists. Perhaps. Like, when he says stuff defending Laura Ingram's comparison of child detention centers to summer camps.
What she is discussing is that people actually are being treated pretty humanely in detention centers, which is generally a true story.
Does he ever think, hey, what if I'm wrong about this, like I was with those other racists who are wrong and bad? Especially since he did this on the same day it was reported that a 5th child had died in one of those detention centers. It's not surprising that the kid who, like all kids, didn't care about civilian casualties is now an adult who defends this stuff and justifies it because
people actually are being treated pretty humanely.
Yes, I'm a serious person, so I prefer that my child detention centers are pretty humane.
If you're interested in a more nuanced discussion, take a look at the article A Multidimensional Analysis of Religious Extremism, where this question is properly approached. Ben's entire argument is for some middle-aged white guy in Arkansas or something that has never met a Muslim. Ben is essentially telling him, oh yeah, you should be afraid. They're everywhere, and there are a whole lot of them. Ignore silly things like research and science, but be afraid.
Now the question isn't whether Islam itself is violent. It's what its adherents believe, because that's what they act upon. There's plenty of violent material in the Old and New Testaments. Hey, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I read the Old Testament a lot. But believers in those particular texts are not currently ramming airliners into towers or beheading journalists or mutilating female genitalia.
He starts off his argument by the usual claims of these conservative types, that a lot of religions contain content that can be considered violent. That's true, and there's usually context around that content, but these types aren't too fond of context. Regardless, his argument is that those believers, meaning of other religions, aren't currently ramming planes into towers, killing journalists, or carrying out FGM. What he's trying to do here is essentially other Muslims generally. It's an attempt to associate Muslims with a certain act. Interestingly, this discussion, and Ben's framing of radicalism, doesn't touch far-right violence, typically done by young white men. In fact, it's the most common form of terrorism in the US. The overwhelming majority of quote-unquote lone wolf attacks, too, are committed by whites in the US. If Ben truly were worried about radicalism, where's his video discussing the dangerous and increasing trend of young white guys shooting up schools, crowds, and places of worship? Far-right terrorism is far more common and much more deadly. He doesn't realize that the perception of overrepresentation of Muslims as perpetrators of attacks is simply due to higher coverage if the attacker was Muslim in the first place. By the way, this isn't even mentioning what the US and NATO did in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, etc., which definitely was terrorism, but isn't considered so because it gets the colonial stamp of approval. But no.
That's it. That's the thing. Despite this claim that facts don't care about your feelings and his logic-based persona, Ben is wrong about the facts a lot. And he uses flawed logic almost all of the time. And he exists exclusively in a bubble. And so does literally everyone else. That's the thing. No one is perfect, and people naturally make decisions based on their feelings. And that's not always bad. A lot of times it's called empathy. And it's a big part of what's behind a lot of advances in history and human rights. Ben?
Be watching and increased protest marches. That's a lie. All that was basically nonsense, and that America is just a history of whites keeping blacks down, and that no progress has essentially been made. If there is progress, it's mostly a lie. That's totally possible and plausible. And the problems that have plagued communities in the United States, not just the black community in the United States, but problems of racism or problems of sexism, the way those get alleviated is sign everybody a $80,000 check, and the problem will be alleviated. Incentives matter on both ends. So the idea is that you give some people more money and they'll do well. Right. If you create a welfare system that benefits single motherhood, you will get more single motherhood. I mean, the single motherhood rate in the black community before welfare was 20%. Now it's 70%. The rules today are racist. You don't have to have an argument with somebody if you assume they're racist. So I guess if you call everybody a racist, you don't have to have an argument. You believe in the inferiority or superiority of a group based on race. You're just full of it. I never said that stuff.
Ben Shapiro is an extremely biased, emotional narcissist who pretends he's a student of logic and debate, but is actually just a talking head for conservatives, and has used his popularity and personal bigotry and religious beliefs to stoke the fires of racism and political hatred for way too long, and he shouldn't be taken seriously.
My voice isn't that low, but beyond that, as far as the first question, which is do people have thoughts that don't manifest in behavior? Yes, all the time. For instance, every thought that you have about walking up here and strangling me right now. I mean, I assume like, we have thoughts all the time that don't manifest in behavior, and this is true every single day. We consider thoughts that cross our minds. The problem with unconscious bias is the idea is you don't even know that you're having the thought, right? So how can you stop it if you don't even know that you're having it? But then we should be able to gauge the unconscious bias and its impact on behavior. That's why it's unconscious bias as opposed to conscious bias. Right? The idea behind unconscious bias is that it's not even a ghost, it's a ghost of a ghost. Because you don't even know you're having the thought. So people, like, the whole idea behind diversity training is the idea that you can retrain people to stop their chain of thoughts in order so that it doesn't manifest in behavior. I don't think that every thought manifests in behavior. If it did, then every time a man saw a good-looking woman walk down the street, a straight man saw a good-looking woman down the street, we'd have a real mess on our hands. So the second question, the idea was a little too broad for me to respond to, which is just because something is tough, don't we have to face up to it? Yes, we have to face up to tough things all the time. And one of the tough things I would suggest that we face up to is that you have a lot more control over your own behavior and the decisions you make than the supposedly widespread unconscious bias of people you've never met.
When I speak about white privilege, yes, so when I speak about white privilege, I'm speaking specifically about behavior. Okay, there have been no studies, and really I've looked at these studies, the connection between what they call implicit bias, this is their favorite phrase now, implicit bias, unconscious bias, and biased behavior has yet to be proven at any level that is even remotely necessary to be used in, for example, a courtroom, which is why it's never been used in a courtroom. It is also true that there is no way, there really isn't, there's been no proven way to alleviate what they call unconscious bias, which means that we're ghost hunting. So what I would suggest is that if there is unconscious bias, and I'll acknowledge the possibility or the reality of unconscious bias, if there is, then I need you to I don't care about what's in people's heads so much as what they do. So if you point me to a racist behavior, don't worry, I'll let you respond. If you point me to a racist behavior, I'm happy to stand alongside you and protest it. What I can't do is protest about things in people's head that I don't know about because I'm not a mind reader.
But see, the problem is that since a lot of what you say is wrong, like in a way that's really easy to spot, it means you're either purposely lying or just, like kind of a dummy. Let's start with your core belief that facts don't care about your feelings, as illustrated by this PragerU video you put out with that exact same title.
Vanderbilt University, November 2015.
200 students rise up to protest the white privilege and microaggressions of the racist, bigoted Vanderbilt administration. The protesters don't offer any specific examples of discrimination, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that they feel victimized.
So we're 19 seconds into the video, and Ben has established his first fact. That in November of 2015, a group of students at Vanderbilt University held a protest against the racist school administration, but failed to give any specific examples of such racism. Except that's literally not true, and just by Googling the school and date, aka the very first words he said, you'll find that the students were specifically calling for the renaming of a dormitory, as well as the suspension of a professor who they believed wrote an Islamophobic op-ed, the latter something that was being debated since the beginning of the year. Incidentally, the professor in question can now be seen in her own PragerU videos, lying about other stuff. Interesting how that works out. Now,
can you tell me why you think Ben Shapiro is a racist and homophobe?
Sure. He believes in the displacement of Palestinian people. He says that Native Americans were barbaric until Christopher Columbus came. He also believes that brown people don't have human rights. All of these things, I think, make him racist.
Because along with being extremely racist and apparently dangerous all the time, Ben is also painfully not self-aware about how racist and dangerous he is all the time.
Does it ever strike you as somewhat off to be in a room kind of making light of victim culture and having this kind of hearty laughter and looking around and seeing that the vast majority of the faces are white?
No, because I've said the exact same thing in front of faces that were not white. So I've been very consistent about this.
I know it's not that you change your message, it's just that it seems to resonate mostly with white people.
I don't think that that's true. I mean, I think that I wish I were invited to more crowds that were more racially diverse. That'd be great.
My God, Ben! That is adorable. The guy just asked you why you think your message is only resonating with white people, and you denied that was true before literally saying that racially diverse crowds don't ever want to listen to you speak. And why do you suppose that is, Ben? Man who claims that his message isn't just for white people, but also wonders why only white people invite him to speak? Holy smokes!
I mean, I think his whole shtick is just kind of acting like he's intellectually superior to people and things like that, when in reality he just skews statistics. I mean, anybody can get a number and, you know, it's whatever one. Yeah, there's lies, damned lies, and statistics.
680,030,000. 680,030,000 radical Muslims. And that's out of a total population in those countries of 942.4 million Muslims total. And it seems fair to assume that similar proportions of people in countries like, say, like Algeria, Syria, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Tunisia, Somalia, and Libya are also radicalized. And if they are, then, well, we're above 800 million Muslims who are radicalized, more than half the Muslims on Earth. That's not a minority, that's now a majority. And that's still not even surveying hundreds of millions of Muslims in other countries.
They say, so that's what he does. And he's not really interested in showing a fair debate, I think.
In other words, the myth of the tiny radical Muslim minority is just that. It's a myth. And, unfortunately, it's a myth that's going to get a lot of civilized people killed.
Oh lord. A general comment though, because you get the idea of his video. You see that he generalizes the Pew Research polls to populations of sometimes hundreds of millions. Indonesia's 200 million, Nigeria's over 70 million, Egypt's 90 million, on and on. Interesting how he doesn't mention the sample sizes of the research he's citing. At the most, it was a survey of 1,100 people, and at the least, it was just a few hundred. Yes, generalizing flawed definitions of radicalization based on small sample sizes and the ignorance of your audience to literal hundreds of millions of people across the world is a very honest and rational thing to do. You get 100 people. 23 said yes to some controversial this or that, and all of a sudden, a whole quarter of Pakistan's hundreds of millions also support that same opinion. Funny how that works. Incorrect and harmful ideas should be corrected. There's no question about that. These issues are real and do in fact exist. We should follow an approach of how to ideologically, theologically, and politically correct and neutralize these views. Not only this, but they should be approached in a way that the population in mind would be most receptive to changing their habits. Finger-wagging coupled with a drone strike or two isn't how that's going to happen. The imperializing of these countries, along with bombing and colonial feigned disappointment, isn't helping the issue of poverty and lack of education that gives rise to the more unsavory opinions expressed.
Can't be that stupid. Surely you're merely that dishonest. A historian might say this kind of thing is a really scurrilous work of revisionism, like David Irving, who uses revisionism to deny the Holocaust and rehabilitate Hitler. It's used to attack anyone attempting to introduce a welfare state as fascist. Fascists hated the Weimar Republic's welfare state. It made people lazy, leeches on society. But in order to get affirmation of these feelings that the left are the real fascists, you'd have to approach some kind of like a fake historian who's a convicted fraud or something.
Fascism at its core is the ideology of the centralized state.
Oh good, there you are, my dear. Anyone who takes this man seriously should not be taken seriously. It is embarrassing that Ben had this fake historian on to push his historically immoral lie that fascism is when the government does something, instead of like a charismatic male right-wing demagogue in the form of an ideologically inconsistent and unprincipled opportunist who plays on emotions and fears and popular trends to further a hatred and dictatorship against the left amidst popular enthusiasm due to ineffective liberal governance and political gridlock, leading to an uneasy alliance with conservative elites for the purposes of their own agenda, while a collection of syncretistic intellectuals spend their time complaining about liberal academia and communists, while the cult-like movement and leader create new speak, new imagery and traditions stemming from resentments and fears manifesting themselves in ultranationalism, anti-globalism, anti-homosexuality, anti-transgenderism, anti-Marxism, anti-cultural Marxism, anti-intellectualism, anti-welfare, a war on the lying press because disagreement is treason, an obsession with heroism and machismo and weaponry, an obsession with conspiracy theories, a fear of others and dirty, criminal, animal immigrants who are invading the nation and who must be expelled. They're an invasion. Put them in camps. Or, I guess, if I had to use facts and logic, I'd say
bad and wrong.
Anyway, I'm glad we got to the subject of fascism, which Ben is an expert on, and Ben's relationship to it, and Trump, and Nazis. Because it's time for our next segment.
Fascist mentality in action.
Well, I think that if you want to argue with the characterization, then we can talk about what exactly his State of the Union address said.
How ironic, they say, that our politics seems more divided than ever.
Plenty of things are bad and wrong, but it doesn't make them fascist.
Well, I suppose that's true.
You said they should turn their badge in as a Jew.
No, you stupid. Any societal structure that results in a racial inequality is itself racist. I've been doing this for legitimately more than half my life. I'm 35 and I started when I was 17. And every racial disparity is attributable to a system that was rooted in slavery. Not just the black community in the United States, but problems of racism or problems of sexism. The way those get alleviated is sign everybody a $80,000 check and the problem will be alleviated. Incentives matter on both ends. So the idea is that you give some people more money and they'll do well. Right. If you create a welfare system that benefits single motherhood, you will get more single motherhood. I mean, the single motherhood rate in the black community before welfare was 20%. Now it's 70%. The rules today are racist. You don't have to have an argument with somebody if you assume they're racist. So I guess if you call everybody a racist, you don't have to have an argument. You believe in the inferiority or superiority of a group based on race. You're just full of it. I never said that stuff. Like, I'm sorry, but you decided that you wanted to throw a firebomb at the federal courthouse. Who are you going to believe?
Isn't the Republican Party now the party of Trump?
No, I mean, I think that the Republican Party is always the party of whomever is the president, technically speaking. Most Republicans see President Trump as a vehicle for their policy preferences, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with all of his personal foibles or the way that he behaves or the things that he says.
You know, because nothing bad has ever happened when conservatives enabled a damaging person because they agree with some of their policies. You know, Ben's not. The fascists are the gays and the college kids who don't like that he goes out of his way to misgender them. Those are the fascists. Also the president. No, not that one. There he is. When pressed on that article and how that's not very civil or reasonable, Ben, and how, well, that's not what fascist means, Ben destroyed Andrew Neil's asshole with his logical nuclear cum.
Again, it was your description of the State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist.
The wording of President Trump's 2012 address was bad and wrong.
That's all. There are plenty of things that are bad and wrong, but it doesn't make them fascist.
Well, I suppose that's true.
Facts.
And Shapiro, I'm never going to make it through this without laughing, so I'm just going to...
For example, you described Mr. Obama's State of the Union address in 2012 as fascist mentality in action.
Well, I think that if you want to argue with the characterization, then we can talk about what exactly his State of the Union address.
Right now, has the strongest, most durable economy in the world.
I'm just going to. Shapiro goes on this kind of rant to say that, you know, the conservative intelligentsia, which he is apparently a part of, they have robust debate about what should be done about the medical system and whether or not climate change is a threat. Now, keep in mind, he didn't actually point out any new ideas they have, just said that they talk about it. And then he gets posed one kind of tough question, not really, but I mean, I guess it could be if you were used to people that just play ball with you.
I mean, I guess.
Also, I hope you're having fun, by the way, going through every old tweet that I've ever sent to try and do gotcha questions.
Well, you said
sure.
Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage.
Well, as I say in an article entitled, "Here's a list of all the giant, bad, dumb things I've ever said."
Was that dumb?
What? Yes, that's a dumb tweet. Frankly, I find this whole thing a waste of time. If you want to read the book and critique the book, why don't you read and critique the book? If you want to critique me, you can think whatever you want of me.
Why don't you
frankly,
just try and
I don't care. I don't frankly give a damn what you think of me since I've never heard of you.
And Ben just goes off the rails, tells him to be honest in his own biases. I hope by now you have read a little bit about who this guy is. He goes on to say that you know, if you're on the left, just say that you're on the left. Getting it out there early. Don't believe anything this guy says. He's part of the other team. And then he says it's pretty evident from your questions who you are. So he doesn't know. He doesn't know that, I mean, this is kind of like somebody in the U.S. calling Rush Limbaugh on the left. Now, the whole point Neil was trying to point out was that these type of pundits are coarsening debate in American media. This may be one of the only things Andrew, Neil, and I will ever agree on.
Idea about anything going on, and I didn't vote for Trump or Hillary. And then Ben Shapiro actually came to our campus to speak, and that's my first introduction to conservatism. And I listened to his speech, and I really didn't hear anything very controversial. I thought he made some really great points, and that just got me more invested in politics and what's going on, and here I am today.
Well, hi, Ben. You have a lot of followers and therefore have a great responsibility worthy of engaging in self-reflection. Yet you never do, and you're pretty dishonest and or wrong about a lot of dangerous stuff, but you keep going, and I just really would love it if you would consider that.
Onto this dumb shit. Here we go.
Whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. There's some whores in this house.
I said certified freaks, 7 days a week. Wet ass P-word, make that pull-out game weak. Yeah, you effin' with some wet ass P-word. Bring a button and a mop for this wet ass P-word. Give me everything you got for this wet ass P-word. Beat it up, N-word, what you charge? Extra large and extra hard. Put this P-word right in your face. Swipe your nose like a credit card. Hop on top, I wanna ride. I do a cable while it's inside. Spit in my mouth, look in my eyes. This P-word is wet. Come take a dive. There's some whores in this house. Whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. Whores in this house. There's some whores in this house. Whores in this house. There's some whores in